Chapter 9. The first step of half a man's half a man. The magic bag Baragara handed him was a belt pouch-type bag for storing small items. It was an old type of magic bag with a used dark green crocodile-like skin, partially reinforced with metal and engraved with magic circles in demon's blood, which could not be seen from the front. Usually used as a glove compartment, it led to multiple compressed subspaces when activated by magic. One bag was the size of a wardrobe, and in the case of this bag, 3 subspaces were fixed. But then again, I never thought I'd be able to stick my hand in and take them out. How primitive and wonderful. It really feels like a storage unit. Don't put it together with the spirit thread storage. Still, it's quite gratifying to be able to hold 3 wardrobes worth of stuff without worrying about the weight. The space at the entrance could be expanded to the size of the case, so you could see inside, but usually you just stuck your hand in and pulled out what you needed. So, unless you were very lazy, you could customize it by making your own dividers, accessory compartments, and platforms for weapons, etc. to fit the items you wanted to put inside for ease of use. Surprisingly, that sounds like fun too. The people of Masaki Village bought materials at a home improvement center and built their own furniture, shelves for organizing daily necessities, and even house additions and renovations. They could adjust the height, size, etc. for their own convenience, and most of all, they enjoyed thinking about it. In the olden days, it was commonplace to do so, and everyone's house was equipped with proper carpentry tools. Sana watched Baragaru's back as he walked away, patting the magic bag that was now his, happily following along. But this one can automatically recharge the magic element and maintain its functionality semi-permanently. This is an advantage over the latest magic bag of magic crystals. The skin of the demon collected the magical element and charged it into the magic circle drawn with the demon's blood, maintaining the subspace. Of course, to open the gate to it, you had to activate the magic. But thanks to its effect, even if it was left unattended, the objects inside would not be lost. Ring and bracelet types are always in contact with the skin, so they are auto-filled. Even if they are removed, if the magic crystals are refilled, they can be maintained for several decades. People who can afford such equipment don't care about the cost of filling it. KK? I feel like I'm bragging about my solar-powered calculator to a guy who uses spreadsheets on his computer. I certainly understand that magic crystal technology is revolutionary. But you don't think that spirit threads have been put to practical use, do you? I didn't realize that they had also made storage practical. When Baragaru told him about the latest magic bag, he found out that there was an infinite storage unit that used a transfer gate from a book he saw in the library. It's an appropriation of something that actually exists. If only someone had come up with the idea, it would have been Columbus egg. However, unlike Sana's spirit thread storage, the size of this storage was quite large, as it utilized a gate for transportation. To begin with, the magic circle itself that fixed the gate was huge, and only something like a safe that was fixed in place could be built. And unlike Sana's spirit thread storage, it was not possible to manage detailed receipts and disbursements. The only way to store things was to put them in a huge case and move them in and out, so although it was infinite, it could only hold one case. I didn't think that the museum had one of these, though. But it sure is a good way to store the collection. Baragara said that the infinite storage in the basement was huge, like a train, with several containers connected to each other. But it was good to hear about the latest and greatest in the old magic bags while I was learning how to use them. It was especially informative on how to get things out of the bag. The newest magic bag required you to touch the object when you put it in. And just like Sana's spirit thread storage, the image of the object was recorded in the magic crystals during the storage process. Even if the person who put the item in the bag forgot it, the inventory was recorded in the magic crystal, so by touching it and imagine it, the list of stored contents could be viewed at any time, and as long as it was registered. Even other people could know the inventory and retrieve it. What was all that thinking? It's like, but I've made a lot of interesting inventions in the process of thinking about it, so it's not a waste of time. I know. There have been many cases in which technologies that we gave up on as useless turned out to be very powerful if we had just changed our point of view. I'm just amazed that such a roundabout and troublesome idea has been made possible by magic. Chi indeed. Sena and Nayuta looked at each other and chuckled. Despite their many differences, their gears were finally beginning to mesh. Kid, this is where we're entering today. So it's not the same as the guild entrance? Baragaru pointed not to the main building of the Hunters and Adventurers Guild, which looked like an old stone bank, but to a large staircase just beside it. This is another guild facility. It leads to a place you know. The staircase was a spiral type, leading vertically to the basement. The air was a bit cooler as he followed Baragaru down the stairs, and the sound of water and miscellaneous smells began to waft through the air. It was nostalgic for Sena, similar to the smell of his parents' old store before he went to space. Then, the view suddenly opened up and a place that looked like a huge shopping mall appeared below. I didn't realize such a big place was underground. At all. Isn't it more down the hill where you always received meat for delivery? There's a building above ground that way. Sena gazed admiringly at the huge space, which looked a little scary, like an underground drainage facility in Tokyo. Somewhere there was a window for lighting, or daylight was coming in, and besides that, the magic crystal lights were on. And even then, it's underground, so there are a lot of lights. Are you okay with the cost of filling them or something? Gahahaha. Half of them are the ones you're filling every night. I was wondering why you bring in so many every night, but it's for the lighting here. With the magic crystals here, even if you're filling a large amount, I can always misrepresent who's doing it and where the payment is coming from. And I have regular orders. This is a semi-subterranean facility that used to be a quarry, so there are a lot of inconveniences without lighting. Cheap magic tree and magic oil lamps aren't very bright, and there's the hassle of daily refilling, turning lights on and off, and the danger of fire. And with that, Baragaru began to proceed along the wooden and metal bridge built into the hollow. This is the site of a stone quarry. Looks like good stone, doesn't it? The walls of the space were not dug as buildings, but the entire surface was left as it was quarried. Nayuta's eyes shone when she saw it, similar to the eyes of Eri and Washi, who found something interesting, which Sena also remembered all too well. Weigh yourself. If an amateur picks an unintentional spot, it could collapse. I want the best part possible, so we can build our own home for the two of us. Listen to me. And it's not like we need a house right away, so just wait a little longer. Either way, if you cut out that much, you're in big trouble. Cutting it out with the magical element range teleportation was instantaneous. A huge cutout mark with a smooth, perfectly polished cut surface would be the source of a great deal of fuss. This place is also a meat butchering and processing plant that takes advantage of the abundant underground water. The temperature underground is constant all year round, so it's ideal for aging and storage. Of course, in addition to meat, it also serves as a storage facility for fresh produce, making it the largest market in and around the city. Well, it's the center of the city's food and economy. At this scale, you could call it an underground city, couldn't you? It has a history of being a magic shelter during wars with other countries. And since the temperature is constant, some people spend the middle of summer here. It sure is a nice place, isn't it? It felt a little chilly, but you could always put more clothes on. We've already taken all the stone out of this area, but there's still some mining going on in the back, so don't go too far in. Okay, let's go. Sena silently ignored Nayuta's prodding. Yeah, I'll be careful, but are you sure there won't be any collapses or anything? Gahahaha. Mining is properly calculated there. This large cavity is supported by sufficient pillars and structures added later. And there are building restrictions on above-ground buildings, so no more buildings can be built on the mountain. When a building is rebuilt or extended, it is obliged to be made of lighter materials. It's pretty heavy, but it's lighter than it looks. That's a relief to hear. So, where the heck are you going with that? Oh, right there. He could smell the good smells and hear the kids hustling and bustling a little while ago, but when he went out the other side of the wall partition, he saw a large cafeteria downstairs. There were nearly 1,000 kids there, ranging in age from first grade to middle school, eating. Those are the kids who are going to be working with you. Sena was more surprised by the fact that even the kids, who he would describe as still very young, were reserve hunter-adventurers than by the fact that they were going to become Sena's friends. Further down the hall, there was a large auditorium, and one of the rooms attached to the auditorium was a reference room, where items that looked like hunting tools, files, scrolls, etc., which he did not know what they were used for, were neatly arranged on shelves. It looks like a reference room. It looks like a room in that museum. The room was at the bottom of the hill, so there was plenty of bright sunlight streaming in through the windows. You know the Pito, don't you? Yes, I saw it in the demon book. That's the meat I hand out every morning, right? The Pito was an herbivorous demon similar to a guinea pig, about 40 centimeters long. It was timid and basically nocturnal and lived in burrows in the ground. Its magical organs were small, so its main materials were meat and fur. They are the demons that support not only us, but also the whole ecosystem of the magical sea of trees. They are more fertile than goblins and multiply quickly. They are also the main cause of the spread of the Sea of Magic. Do they transport seeds and pollen? That's one of the main factors, but they often cause small-scale stampedes. They increase in numbers where they live, and when they become saturated, the surplus Pitos move en masse to other areas, where they multiply again. If the land is inhabited, they cause a feeding frenzy, and demons that feed on the Pitos gather there. Then, even stronger demons will gather in search of them and exterminate the people. If it becomes an uninhabited field, it will become a forest of demon trees and a dense forest in a few years, slowly expanding its habitat. That's a nuisance, isn't it? The children are the ones who can prevent that from happening at the water's edge and secure a large amount of meat. Oh! So the reserve army of hunter adventurers. That doesn't sound very realistic. Gahahaha. Don't underestimate them just because they're kids. The children harvest 40% of this market if we limit ourselves to Pitos alone. Of course, it's not just children, but adults as well. It's a good source of retirement income for retired hunters and adventurers, and it's also a good source of off-season income for farmers. 40% is certainly a lot. Oh! And as far as those kids are concerned, it also means welfare. Work in that mill they just had? Yes, the harvest money paid to the children is tax-free, and if there are problems at home, the guild will take care of the money and give it to them when they come of age. Whether or not they become hunter adventurers in the future, it will help them prepare for that time. As for meals, as long as they work, they will receive breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Of course, this is up to the convenience of each family, but some of the children eat 3 meals here and sleep in an empty space in the basement. There are also classes to teach them how to read and write, so the literacy rate is quite high. That's got a lot of advantages on the Lord's side. That's a good system, but is it safe to kill demons in the first place? There were quite a few small children, you know. Even though it's called extermination, it's really systematized trap hunting. The adults are in charge of collecting and transporting the Pitos, and they are also in charge of patrolling the area. Above all, the children have access to a special place. When you say special, do you mean systematized? Although not visible from the center of the town, there is a buffer zone of open land between the fields and the sea of magic trees that covers the perimeter of the town. There are no demon trees there, so dangerous demons rarely come out. As far as I know, there are only a few cases a year when other demons appear in the area, and they are quickly exterminated by the adults in charge of collecting and transporting the traps. The most important thing is that it is much easier to work with. Baragaru pointed to a shelf in the reference room. There, a long, thin, sturdy-looking cloth bag and what looked like a bellows were on display. Pito burrows, like those of other animals, have many entrances and exits. We block some of them with these bag traps. Then, through another doorway, you can go to. Baragara held something like a bellows and moves it lightly. But, despite the light movement, there was quite a noise in the room. And threaten them with this babuda, and the Pitos will rush to the exit where there is no sound. That's how we're going to round them up. That babuda? That's quite a sound. It's said to mimic the sound of their natural enemies breaking into their burrows, but I'd be surprised if someone made that noise on my doorstep, ha 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 ha. Anyway, it is important to read the burrow and where to set the trap. And the timing of the sound is also important. The party of 3 hunt in a plot of about 200 meters on each side. The density of the nests is surprisingly high, so it's a full day's work. Does 3 people have some special meaning? If it's just the kids, I'm sure a larger group would be fine. Because that's the number of people to foster cooperation, and because this was the most efficient way to do it. Bubuda is not something that can be sounded by a large number of people. On the contrary, they may panic and lock themselves inside the den. It is important to lead them to an escape route. Traps are the same way. The most efficient way is to set 3 traps and threaten them with 3 bubudas. But you have to try it out. How big is the den? The more entrances and exits, the more difficult it will be to select them, and it seems like it would be hard to find them in the first place. That's where this location has an advantage. Baragara grinned and pulled out a file from the reference cabinet and unfolded it. It showed a map of the burrows, and surprisingly, the burrows were so tightly packed together that there were no gaps between them. It's a map showing the location of all the burrows. It's not perfect because they may dig new holes, but I update it every time there is a change. That alone gives you an idea of the vantage point of this place, right? I see, so it's systematized. But if there's something like this, I'm sure we'll eradicate it soon. Gahahaha. Don't knock the fertility of the piddos. The buffer zone is quite large to begin with, so it's impossible to cover the entire area every day. It takes 6 days for all the people engaged in piddo hunting, including adults, to go around the whole area, and no matter how hard we try to catch them, more keep coming in from the sea of magical trees. No matter how many piddos we catch day after day, the nest is full by the 6th day. I don't know if that's good or bad, but they're an excellent meat resource. Then, with this high density, it looks like there will be a lot of feeding damage. That's why we planted geophyte moss in the buffer zone, so it's not so bad. Geophyte moss is a general term for mosses that grow on magical energy. It grows extremely fast, and no matter how much the piddos devour, it will grow back in 2 days. Although it is a magical tree, if the soil is improved with this moss, any wasteland can be fully harvested in about 5 years. The drawback is that it needs to be burned every year before planting, but the burned moss is a good fertilizer and does not cause crop failure. It's an important resource, just like the piddos. That's also well done. Maybe it's another one of those magical element life support systems. And the piddos that come to the buffer zone are mainly weak and young individuals who could not have a territory in the magical sea of trees, so that is also an advantage for the children. I see, so there are a lot of favorable conditions. Young, inexperienced individuals were less cautious. And if they were weak, they were less of a threat. That's right. That's why some of them earn as much as adults. That's why problems arise, though. The last part was somewhat like a soliloquy, and Sena felt like he just said it without being conscious of it. Problems? Anyway, let me introduce you to the kids who will be the kids' party. These are the kids who will be in your party. After the explanation, Baragaru invited a boy and girl into the room. The girl was taller and older than the boy, but they were both in elementary school. Nice to meet you, I'm Sena. If you feel like you've been forced into trouble, you can run away as soon as you can, brother. The boy did not take the offered hand, but suddenly and gruffly cut him off. His eyes were wide awake as if he had given up on something. Cheeto. I'm going first. Despite the girl's rebuke, the boy called Cheeto quickly averted his gaze and walked out of the reference room. Sorry, Sena. I'll go ahead of you. Oh, I'm Gushika and that boy is called Cheeto. Nice to meet you too. The girl's hair was cut short, and she seemed quiet, but her firm speech and neat bow reminded him of Kariko. The problem was the boy with the shaggy head and wizened eyes. He has various small scars on his face, doesn't he? It was normal for a country boy to have scars and cuts on his face, arms, and legs. But Cheeto's wounds were clearly more numerous, and his injuries were unnatural. Sena, who was an expert on injuries caused by natural disasters and the like, could tell at once that the wounds were man-made. Cheeto's father is here for a reason. He is a hunter-adventurer on indefinite leave due to an injury. On indefinite leave? That's a strange way of putting it, isn't it? He became a hunter-adventurer and steadily rose through the ranks, never failing. He became so conceited that he took on unreasonable requests and failed. It is a common story for young hunter-adventurers, but if they have never experienced anything like failure before, even after their injuries are healed, their fear and pride often get in the way, and they often end up rotting. In addition, if a child's income is good, it is easy for him or her to live off of it. And the target is not limited to their own children. And not just to the other kids in the party? Baragar gave a small nod in response to Sena's question. Complain about the distribution. With parents like that, it's hard to get kids to form a party, and there's no one to partner with. Even though he's corrupt, he used to be a medium-ranked hunter-adventurer, so even if he's an adult, he's not a good partner for the average civilian to start with. But what about that girl? She doesn't look like a sibling to me. Their parents are former party members. And they're in the top class, so they can't touch her. That girl is a year older than Cheeto, and she was hunting with another party, but she couldn't bear to see him like this, so she formed a party for him. If 3 is the basic rule, you're missing 1. So, it's on me, is it? Yes, but before that, Cheeto's presence here itself is starting to become a problem. There was an organization that used to threaten the children directly and force them to give up their income, and some of the parents are afraid that Cheeto's presence here will cause the same thing. Can't the guild do something about it? And what about that former organization? We destroyed that one, so now it's your turn. Baragar put his hand on Sena's shoulder with a bang, as if he knew what to do. Oh, me? I'm in that role, sir. This is the test to become a hunter-adventurer. Our main job is to kill and capture demons, but we also do a lot of miscellaneous work as a rough-and-tumble shop. And if we form a party, this kind of trouble is bound to happen. It's typical of Sena that things don't go smoothly. But still, that boy is a complete name-dropper. It doesn't mean the same thing over here. I see. That's what he meant when he lent me his magic bag. Sena let out a small sigh as he heard Baragaru's high-pitched laugh. Gahahaha. The duration is 1 month. I'm asking you to do it. I'll do my best. Sena changed his mind and headed to the meeting place in the auditorium, knowing from past experience that it would be futile to argue with him. And there he encountered the abominable past. Oh yes, I'm sure it will. The figure of Cheeto and Gushika standing alone, a little apart from the children who were partying and talking harmoniously with each other, was the very figure of the old Sena. He was a lonely child, shunned because of his bad luck. If he had not met Kariko, Tsukiko, Tenchi, and the rest of the Masakis, he didn't know what would have happened to him. His parents were also mentally trapped, and even the worst-case scenario was a real possibility. Are you sure? Possibly. There could be some nasty people involved. Nayuta asked, sensing Sena's determination. Well, that's exactly what always happens, you know. Well, that's what they always do. When I see like that, I can't say no. Sena agreed with Nayuta and approached them smiling. Here you go. Let's have a light meeting then. You don't mind, do you? You heard that, right? The girl named Gushika asked with a surprised look on her face, which was quite surprising to Cheeto. I'll give it a try. By the way, I'll take 80% of the proceeds. Is that okay? Whoa, hey. No way, right? That's just too much. For me, I can't help it, but big sis Gushika. Cheeto's resentment was less about himself and more about the girl. But Gushika restrained Cheeto's indignation. It's okay. If you don't party with us, you don't get paid. Because. He smiled as if to reassure her, then looked at Sena with that same smile. Sena, that's fine. Please take care of us. He bowed politely. Okay. I'll ask Gushika to do the lottery. Okay. Gushika bowed slightly to Sena and headed for the lottery which had begun on the auditorium platform. You're just like my father, aren't you? Cheeto muttered to Sena. It was more a murmur of resignation than hatred. Che, I knew that's where the woods were getting in. I had a bad feeling because of the strange layout of the burrows. The moment they arrived at the hunting ground and saw the woods in the plot, Cheeto's expression turned into a full-blown frown. Sena and his partners had drawn not only a flat area, but also a place where regular woods encroached. The map given to them at the auditorium only showed the location of the nests, so they did not know the reason for the blank areas and distorted nest layout until they arrived at the site. Gushika, with her long experience, felt she knew, but Cheeto's experience was shallow due to his father's problems. What is the problem? Because of the tree roots, the nests are complicated and hard to read. So the forest part tends to be an afterthought, and the maps are inaccurate or not researched. You're right, there was no entry for the nest in the wooded area. Sena visualized the magical element and looked at it. There are so many reactions to medicinal herbs and various other things that it's hard to check. The identification of internal and external magical elements can be done at. Sena visualized the magic elements and colored them. The external element was white, and the internal element was red. This was another newly developed magic. And the problem with this one is that it resets with a single blink. It would be nice if it could scan all the time. The identification of internal and external magical elements consumed a lot of magical elements, unlike visualization. He tried it before in the same way as visualization and was instantly disoriented. This was due to a sudden shortage of magical elements, which occurred when scanning for identification was performed over a distance of infinity in the case of no designation. In the first place, simply looking at an object with the eyes and perceiving it as information were two completely different things. When reading a book or working on a computer, one's field of vision was extremely narrowed in order to comprehend what was being read. It was even easier to understand when you considered the danger of working on a cell phone. If the field of vision and the amount of information that came in was unlimited, it was no wonder that he had depleted his magical elements and his brain felt like it was about to go flat. It would be easier if we could link to my mother's data. Unfortunately, he ignored Nayuta's boastful remarks. He then specified the area to be scanned and narrowed down the range, but of course, places out of the range were not visible, so he set up multiple patterns. One was a fixed display pattern with a fixed range, and the other was a pattern in which the range varied in accordance with his line of sight. Although it was now possible to see the magic element at all times, it was not possible to recognize what kind of being the owner of the internal magic element was. This information was currently being collected in order to infer the target from the behavior pattern, the amount of magical elements, and the shape of the magical element distribution. It is easy to locate the nest if we make it a static information and increase the accuracy of scanning, right? The nest itself had nothing to do with magical elements, so he couldn't see the nest itself, but underground roots, insects, and even microorganisms tended to accumulate magical elements, albeit in minute quantities, and the number of magical elements in the nest was slightly higher than that in the hole. By comparing internal and external magical elements, it was possible to identify the nest, and Nayuta existed to handle such a process. Let's not do that. If we look into it, it won't be good for them, and that's how we found it in the first place. But what's with the rather strong reactions in some places? It doesn't look like a piddo, but don't you think it's a demon? It's probably some kind of medicinal herb since there is no movement at all. But I haven't seen anything with such a strong reaction in town, so by all means, let's dig in later and check. By all means. Nayuta was enthusiastic about the possibility of obtaining new samples. Sena was not opposed to this. Sena-san, let's start with the flatlands first. We don't want to alarm the piddo, so please move as quietly as possible. I will read the nest. Gushika whispered to Sena, who was staring silently into the woods. Either way, they had to start working to make money. The children had already started hunting in the other plots. Oh, sorry. Then let's start. In this case, is there a specific nest to start from? The rule is that every party should start from the top left, facing the direction of the magic sea of trees. That way, even if we alert the piddos in the next block, they will have calmed down by the time that team moves to that spot. Understood. Sena and the others moved to where Gushika said and began attacking the first den. Oh my, there are quite a few. There are too many compared to the size of the burrow, so they must be shelters rather than dwellers. The number of piddos he had identified through visualization of the magical elements was quite large. Normally, an appropriate number of piddos should live in a family unit, but there were clearly an excessive number of piddos, not only in this nest, but in many other nests. They must have been kicked out of the sea of magic trees and are now using the area as a short-term shelter. Maybe when things settle down a bit there will be some territorial disputes. This must also mean that this is a good hunting ground. After that, maybe the abundant food supply will keep them from fighting. By the way, the moss here is like a fluffy carpet. Various kinds of mosses were growing in tight spaces, and they were quite thick. Moreover, it seemed that the magic element was used only for restoration and was concentrated in the marks that seemed to have been eaten here and there, and there was almost no reaction in other places. Thanks to this, it didn't interfere with the appearance of the pito in the ground, which was gratifying. Sis, if it's the layout of the nest, I'll remember everything. Cheeto seemed a little exasperated, perhaps from impatience to hurry. It's not just the layout, I have to find out which entrances and exits are being used. Gushika admonished Cheeto in a whisper as they moved along on tiptoe. The map of the plots given to each child was a rough copy of the original in the reference room, a large map made of long, thin pieces of wood. The plot was divided into about 4 scrolls, and the layout was engraved on them. If there was any change in the condition of the nest, it was carved with a knife that Gushika carried. And if there was a change after the hunt, she would update the map in the archives. Paper was not that valuable in this world, but since she was a child and the field work was outside, she does not want it to get dirty or torn. She is very skilled at this, isn't she? She made sure they don't go over the nests. But they still seem to be wary of us to some extent. As soon as Gushika approached, the underground pitos stopped moving slightly and seemed to be on the lookout. They seemed to resume their activity as soon as the footsteps became distant. I wonder if the lack of alertness in this area is because they are young individuals. Yes! More importantly, there is a passageway that is not on the map, and one passageway is blocked. What do you want to do? It was a passage a little longer than the others, with the exit hidden behind a slight rise. Gushika also seemed to feel something strange and tilted her head slightly at the doorway of the blocked passage. If you're wondering, I can help. Sena gently approached the new doorway and motioned to Gushika. Gushika checked the hole, smiled happily, nodded, and returned to the waiting area where Cheeto was waiting. Brother, what are you doing? There's no den over there, man. Sena-san found a new passageway for us. But how did you know? Gushika noticed something strange too, didn't you? I'm not sure if I noticed it, but I found a good spot. She immediately began setting traps around the newly found doorway. The trap bag was crafted so that the entrance was held open by a metal ring, just like the mouth of a carp streamer. The trap bag was secured with long pegs so that it was close to the entrance and exit of the nest. The geosynthetic moss was soft, so the pegs needed to be long enough to reach the hard ground. They couldn't use a hammer or similar tool because they didn't want to alarm the pito, but with Sena's strength, it was possible to slowly push the peg into the ground. Once the preparations were made, all that remained was to scare them with the bibudas. Using the hand signals they had been taught in advance, they gently moved to their respective positions and sounded them at the right time. Bubi, bubby, bubby, bubby. The reverberating sound in the den was terrific, but outside it was surprisingly small. Inside the small space of the den, it must have been a tremendous explosion. And then, from the ground, they heard the rumbling of the pito escaping, and the trap bag that they had set up went on the rampage like a giant snake. A little bit is good. Nayuta sent a magic element point into the den to guide the pitos toward the trap. The result was that all the pitos in the den were now in the trap bag. We did it. Amazing! Cheeto cheered as they struggled to get into the full bag, but the human voice alerted the pitos. Cheeto was silenced by a single glare from Gushika, but her mouth was full of smiles as well. Don't take it too far. It's not good for these kids. This is the first benefit. You seem to be depressed about a lot of things, so you need to lift their spirits a little. I'll add or subtract next time. The pitos that were captured would be put into cages at each party base, and the collectors would come around periodically to carry them away. It would be nice if the water tanks at the base could be refilled with drinking water at that time. After all, they worked all day long and needed a lot of water. However, it was time-consuming to go to a distant relay base every time they needed to fill up. In addition, when leaving the auditorium in the morning, they were given a dried, salty fruit-like substance to replenish their salt levels, which was another indication that this was a well-managed place. The captured pitos were collected in the relay base warehouse and transported to the guild's market, where they were quickly processed into meat and other products. Further in the underground market was a ripening room, where the meat was said to be ready to eat the next morning, but there were also cases where the meat was further ripened at home. This is well thought out. It's really systematized and well set up. You can rest assured that it is well organized. I also think it's to teach them how important it is to prepare and set up the hunting situation. I see. That's something that only Sena, the master of trouble, could have realized. After that, the work continued without any problems, and by mid-morning the hunt on the plains was almost complete. The fact that the adult Sena was in charge of the heavy lifting, such as transporting the captured pittos, also resulted in a modest time savings. It's a little early, but let's go get lunch. I think we should let the place rest a bit too. After the hunt on the plains was over, Gushika suggested that they head to the large warehouse at the relay base that served as the home base for the hunt. This was a stone warehouse, twice the size of a gymnasium, built at regular intervals in the buffer zone. It also served as a storage place for heavy cargo, such as cages, which were troublesome to transport. On the second floor, a large number of people could rest and eat. The end of this buffer zone is the boundary of the warding area. The soldiers stationed near the boundary that Sena saw was also attached to this warehouse. They must be guarding the children as well. Sena-san, the pace is good, so let's eat here. The meals handed out were bento style. It was wrapped in the leaves of the magic tree that was also used in the pitto meat, and the drinks were in water bottles made of a plant that resembled bamboo. The children who received the food went upstairs, while others went directly to the site. Is this quantity really for children? The lunchbox consisted of a sandwich with pitto meat ham, vegetables, and a sauce similar to curry and water slightly flavored with the juice of a magical tree. What surprised him was that the sandwich was just the right amount for Sena, whose appetite had subsided. I guess this is their usual amount, since everyone else seems to be eating normally. Upstairs, the children were eating their meals in their own groups. They looked at Sena for a moment, but then went right back to talking. They were talking about their hunting know-how, their reflections, and so on. Gushika is the same way, but she is more articulate than her age. This is how she is building her foundation as a hunter-adventurer. She's quite dependable. The atmosphere of avoiding Cheeto was not as blatant as it was in the morning, perhaps because Sena and Gushika were with him. But Sena sat a little further away from the kids. It's a pretty nice view. The first floor windows were empty, but the second floor windows were filled with glass, and the second floor would be warm enough in the winter. Being a warehouse, the building was quite tall, and the ceiling was quite high, as the first floor was a workshop. The second floor was equivalent to the third or fourth floor of a private house, so it had a good view and was a good place to eat. By the way, Gushika, your nest reading is amazing. Did someone teach you? Most of the trap locations, surprise positioning, etc., were Gushika's suggestions. My father is a hunter-adventurer, and he teaches me a lot of secrets. I'm proud of the fact that my childhood record of catches by compartment hasn't been broken yet, and, even though I'm not with my dad I've never caught so many before. But it's the woods that are left, man. In contrast to Gushika's joy at the harvest, Cheeto was pessimistic, perhaps thinking ahead. Thinking about the future, it's good to have a good experience in a place where conditions are tough, he said. My father says the same thing. The conditions are so good here that it seems like a lot of people would lose a lot of their income if they could only hunt in difficult places when they grow up. You say that, though. The only reason why the results can vary between good and bad locations is because of lack of ability and experience. Trying to figure out how to cover up a bad situation through trial and error is for the future, and you should enjoy it. Hee Sena, you really are just like my father. Che. I'm a kid anyway. Envy and envy of others are feelings we all have, but don't use them as an excuse to put others down or to slack off yourself. The first person you should compete with is the person you were yesterday. Are you losing today? Have you grown even a little? Luck is important, but what is more important is that you are good enough to catch the good fortune that comes your way. Because money and things will disappear, but the abilities and experiences you have acquired will not. It takes effort to keep them from getting rusty, but it's better to be able to do something about it with your own will. The dark look Sena gave for a moment took both Gushika and Cheeto's breath away, And while Seina's was like a powerful medicine for children, it also made his words more persuasive. Seina, did you do that, too? Not just me. We all are. It's just that where you're standing and where you're going are two different things. It's the same that just standing still won't get you anywhere. Gushika nodded her head in agreement, while Cheeto, still pessimistic about his environment, looked down and thought. Anyway, what we need to do now is conquer the forest. Great. From Seina's point of view, Cheeto's unhappiness was minor, but it was still a serious and big concern for him. That's why he didn't just say, work hard, but instead presented a clear goal in front of him. Yeah. Okay. By the way, Gushika, are we allowed to gather anything other than pittos? For example, can we pick medicinal herbs in that forest? And suddenly the pressure was gone from Seina. This kind of on-off is a skill he learned unconsciously around Ceto. What? Yeah, I don't have a problem if it's in the plot, but if you sell it, you have to pay taxes if it's not a pitto, so I'll just focus on hunting unless I have a good reason. Yeah. Well, when you're done, can you give me some time?